Thanks for tuning in to more college football talk on the R-Lads Football Network as we talk Florida Gators football. And it's been a while since we've been able to talk Florida Gators football, so hopefully we found the right guy, because I believe we did. And that is Scott Carter. He is the writer and editor at FloridaGators.com. And Scott, I just love the office. I love the fact that I see like a glimpse of the stadium. You've got the perfect job for Florida fans.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Gator fan, it's pretty good, pretty nice to come into work every day here at the stadium. But there's always something going on. You know, Gator fans, they love the football, but they also, you know, they got baseball, basketball. Everything here does pretty well, so it keeps me busy throughout the year. But this is by far my favorite time of year when football starts to roll around. And you know, certainly this year it feels a lot different than it did last year. Hopefully it stays that way. And, you know, the Gators are going into Dan Mullen's fourth year, man. Those first three went by fast, but 29-9 in his first three. So it's been a nice turnaround for him.
Yeah, I think it's been a while since the Gators were sort of on par with the Alabamas, the Auburns, the LSUs of the world, the Georgias of the world, even for that sake. But it does appear that the tide is turning. And even though there are a bunch of changes we're going to talk about on offense, overall, the program's headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I think, you know, it really became apparent in year one, you know, under Mullen when they went 10-3 and, you know, won the Peach Bowl over Michigan, which had been a nemesis for the Gators the last few meetings. And then, of course, they followed that up in year two, going 11-2. And then last year, in just such an odd year in so many ways with the COVID. But the Gators, you know, they were 8-1 and really in good position there with LSU here at the Swamp. And we all know what happened there. You know, they lost late on a field goal, the Marco Wilson shoe throw. And unfortunately, that kind of started a downward spiral at the end. They played Alabama great in the SEC championship game. But you could tell the same team wasn't the Gators team that played Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. They didn't look good there at all, missing a lot of key players. But, you know, you look at what Mullen's done. Every year under him, they've been competitive. They've been right there in the conversation in the SEC. They finally won the East last year. And I think as you go forward into 2021, you know, there's no reason from what I see, although there are a lot of changes, as you mentioned, you know, with Kyle Trask, Kyle Pitts, some of those guys no longer here. Those are big names to place. But I think what Mullen, more than anything else, Greg, I've learned in his 3+ seasons here, the guy is a hell of a game day coach. And if you can be a great game day coach and you have talent that's right there with your top opponents, it makes a big difference on game day. And I think that's what his trademark has been so far at Florida, winning some of those games with just really his craftsmanship, if you want to call it that.
When it's all said and done, when Dan Mullen's career is all said and done, does he end it as a college coach?
You know, there was a lot of debate about that in the offseason, whether or not he was seriously a candidate at one of the NFL openings. And nothing really came to fruition. There was mostly hot air. But is it going to surprise me if Dan Mullen leaves Florida one day for the NFL? It won't. I think he's, you know, we were talking to him yesterday and someone pointed out that, you know, he's not 50 years old yet. He's entering his 13th season as a head coach in the SEC. So, I mean, the guy's got some really good experience. He's won a lot of games. And you know how these coaches are, Greg. It's really any field. If you're really good at what you do and there's a level that's higher than where you are, you know, it's hard not to want to, as they say, scratch that itch.
Yes.
I mean, we've seen a lot of guys do it. A lot of them don't do well. Some do. You know, the one that everybody's watching right now is Dan Mullen's mentor, Urban Meyer. What's he going to do in the NFL? I'm as curious as anybody because I know Urban Meyer's a great coach. I don't know how that's going to play into the NFL. But, it'll be interesting to watch. But, yeah, Mullen, I could see him if he were to win a national championship here and get that opportunity at the next level. I could see him being a guy that would probably want to take that opportunity if he's still, in his early 50s or so.
Yeah, that's kind of how I talk when people bring up Harbaugh, because I grew up in New Jersey.
Yep.
So when I grew up, there wasn't a lot of college football in New Jersey. And at that time, there was only a certain amount of games on television. So I became a Michigan fan. You basically became one of like 10 power program fans if you grew up in the New York area. I gravitated to Michigan. So I kind of have a feeling and understand what's going on with Harbaugh. And I don't buy the fact that he's going to go to the NFL until, just like what you said about Mullen, until he does his job at Michigan, since it's his alma mater especially, and wins a national championship. If he gets that national championship, I think he'll go, okay, my job is done. I left my program much better than where I got here. But until he does it, it is kind of hard sometimes to make that step, even though, of course, he's been there before.
Yeah, I mean, with him and the ties that he has at Michigan, I totally understand that connection in his mind. I mean, that's, even though it's a great coaching job, it's a different kind of job for him. It's personal.
Yes.
And Mullen has some of that with Florida, obviously. He was offensive coordinator here when Tebow was here, and they were winning those 2 national championships in 3 years. And, when he got back, one of his kind of talking points over and over was, getting that Florida program back to what it was when he left, to go to Mississippi State. And they've certainly climbed the ladder toward that, Greg. The next step for them really is, okay, you got to eventually win the SEC championship. You finally got the East last year. Get in the SEC championship, you're going to make the playoff. And, now that with the way things are looking, if he hangs around long enough and the expansion of the playoff, maybe the second team in the league gets into the college football playoff eventually and has a chance. But again, I mean, you look just what he's done, 29-9 in 3 years. And even when I remember last year when they were 8-1, Greg, I remember just doing some research and tweeting out that, at that point, I think after his first 35 games at Florida, he actually had a better record than than Meyer or Spurrier.
Really?
So that 3-game losing streak kind of dipped him down below him again. But I'm sure that, with this team this year, I like their chances to add several more wins to his resume and still be in the conversation.
How about on the flip side of the field? Because Todd Grantham has also been there with Mullen, and Grantham's got a great resume. He's been around a long time. The defense was really heading on a nice trajectory from year 1 to year 3.
Yeah.
But then everything kind of imploded last year. Pretty much all the top guys are back, though, for this season. So we're definitely expecting a much improved defense this year. Was there a particular reason why things didn't go so well last year?
I think it's multiple, really. I mean, when you look at Florida last year, I mean, and this is true for everybody. So they've talked about it, the lack of continuity from no spring practice, not being around the guys for summer. I mean, if you look across college football, the offensive numbers were up last year. I think the offenses benefited more than defenses just due to the circumstances of the 2020 season. Specifically to Florida, I think there was, when they were going into the season where, they were losing one of I thought their most valuable player in 2019, John Grenard, the transfer defensive lineman. He was such a disruptive force, and they lost him. They lost some of that leadership, and I'm not sure anyone ever really replaced that production-wise. Certainly not. And it was a group of young players that guys like Marco Wilson, Donovan Steiner, Sean Davis, Brad Stewart. Those guys had to kind of have really good peak seasons for the defense to not miss a beat. And I don't think any of them had great seasons. And, there were some injury problems there. So it was, young players getting bigger roles, some lack of production. And quite frankly, I mean, their pass defense was pretty brutal. I think I wrote this week they gave up 28 touchdown passes, which was only Arkansas State gave up more than anybody else in the country.
Wow.
They just didn't make plays back there. And Grantham's defense is always going to be a high risk, high reward kind of system. He likes to gamble, likes to blitz, likes to make the quarterback uncomfortable. And to do that, you have to have that back end playing at a real high level. And I don't think the Gators ever got that last year. And I think that's more than anything when I look at those numbers, because it was a historically bad season for the Florida defense, going from, I think, ninth in the country in 2019 to
Yeah.
83rd last year. So, I mean, it's a huge drop, but I know they have the talent, and I think they've maybe simplified some things with Grantham's defense to improve, communication on the back end. You've got a couple of new assistant coaches back there in Jules Montanar and Wesley McGriff. So there's a lot of changes, Greg. Now we get to see if it equals a move back up in those defensive rankings.
Well, let's talk specifically about some of the players. And the leader in sacks and tackles for loss, Zachary Carter's back. Brenton Cox, the transfer from Georgia, had a nice year one for the Gators last year, so I'm sure there's a lot of expectation about him even having a bigger year. Ventrell Miller led the team in tackles, so he's back. A little bit inconsistent last year, though, like the rest of the defense, but overall, again, there's expectations that he'll have an even better year. And then one of the better press corners in college football, Elam, returns. So there's big expectations there as well. And I also wanted to ask you about a couple of new corners on the team. You have five-star top recruit Jason Marshall, and one of the top transfers, if not the top transfer, Jadarrius Perkins, the JUCO All-American, who's got really good size, very fast, started his career at Missouri. So again, there's a lot of talent on this defense.
Yeah, I don't think talent's going to be an issue. I like the talent there. Those guys you mentioned, let's start with just up front, with Zachary Carter, I thought was the closest guy maybe last year to reaching what Grenard had provided in 2019. I think his best football is ahead this year. I know Brenton Cox Jr. has only really kind of scratched the surface in what the coaches think he can do. He's one of those premier edge rushers that, when he's playing well and healthy, he's going to do things that we saw Jabari Zuniga a couple of years ago do, Ja'Kai Polite. They really made a difference for those Gators defenses on the edge, and that's what they hope Brenton Cox Jr. does. Ventrell Miller's the steady guy in the middle of the quarterback of the defense. He's a really good player. I think he's very important in the overall scheme, just being the guy that's communicating the most back there. But I'm most curious, like we talked about earlier, those names you mentioned in the secondary. Let's start with Kaiir Elam. I think he's an all SEC preseason pick. He's in the mold of some of the great defensive backs Florida's had, in recent years. Keanu Neal was a safety, but Vernon Hargraves Jr. and some of those guys, Jalen Tabor, Quincy Wilson, those guys who really were playmakers. I think Elam fits that back there. He's the guy that he's so good that a lot of the times, the team's going to throw away from him and throw on the other side.
Yeah.
So that's the big question is, can Jadarrius Perkins, who you mentioned, they really like him in preseason so far, and they just lost Jaden Hill, who was kind of projected to start at that spot opposite Elam. They lost him for the season due to a knee injury last week in camp. So now the spotlight's really on Perkins. Jason Marshall Jr., the five-star recruit from Miami, who they have really high hopes for. And they just got a guy in over the weekend, a graduate transfer from Texas A&M, Elijah Blades, set out last year because of COVID and shoulder surgery, but he started at Texas A&M in 19. So, I mean, they've got a veteran there to mix it in. So really, Greg, it's just going to be a early, probably getting different looks at different guys and seeing who really excels in that spot opposite Elam. But for the defense to show an improvement, for them to play the way that Grantham and Mullen won't, I mean, there's going to have to get some of those guys to step up.
Yep. All right. Now let's talk about the offense, and it's all about Emory Jones, isn't it? Because with Trask gone, we can say what you want about Pitts, and of course Tony's gone and Grimes is gone, but it all starts with the quarterback position. And what I'm hearing is that they're going to miss Trask, and Jones a little bit inexperienced, but he's more the style fit for Dan Mullen. Do you believe that that's the case? And what kind of expectations truly are there for Jones?
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly a quarterback that, has that dual threat capability more than Trask did, who was your traditional drop back passer. Emory is a guy that can make a lot of plays happen with his feet, can extend plays, can get, add a lot to the running game. So I like what he brings. I mean, if you've seen him throw in his limited opportunity, I mean, the guy has a real big arm. I mean, he can
Yes.
get the ball down the field. So I don't think they're worried. Dan Mullen was asked a lot about him on Tuesday in his post practice session, just talking about Emory, and he says one thing he knows about Emory. He says he's gonna miss maybe a throw here and there, but he's gonna make plays that few guys can make because of his ability, his athleticism, and just that combination of the dual threat quarterback. And so I think what he's done in camp so far is what they've expected, and he's always been a guy that even when Trask was here or Felipe Franks before him, he would come into some games for spot duty, and he always kind of made the right play. It wasn't always spectacular, but he executed what they wanted. He has an ability to be elusive when he does run. He rarely takes a big hit. But on the other side of that, they're also looking a lot at Anthony Richardson, the red shirt freshman quarterback, who they like a lot too, Greg. He's a guy that, in some ways, probably even fits Mullen's what we're accustomed to Mullen over the years with like guys like Tebow and Dak Prescott and Nick Fitzgerald, those big physical guys who throw and run. Richardson's quite a bit bigger than Emory, so I think what you're going to see probably is he's going to be mixed in some throughout the season because that's what Mullen likes to do. He likes to keep the defense guessing. If he can do that with two quarterbacks who they have similar skill sets, but they go about what they do differently. Emory's a guy, like I said, he's more elusive and kind of a quick cutter. Anthony's a big enough guy. I mean, he can do the power runs, but has a big arm as well. So it's something that I think all Gator fans are going to be curious to see how that plays out, because I do think we're going to see both of them. But Emory is certainly the guy going into the season who, you look at as, hey, this is finally his shot. What can he do with it? And, how much will Richardson kind of offer to, keep defenses guessing?
With Alabama in week 3, game 3, is there a possibility that it's something where Jones plays a couple of series, things aren't really clicking, that he would throw Richardson in early just to see if maybe he could do something? And is that where we're at this point regarding the two quarterbacks, that yes, Jones is the number one guy, but he's going to really have to earn it, and Richardson will be given an opportunity if Jones allows it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably Mullen's approach about it every year.
Yeah.
But I think in this case, yeah, I mean, I could see that. And he's the kind of coach that, when you're playing somebody like Alabama, any, I guess, sneak attack or any adjustment you can make to maybe guess him. And if that is a quarterback change, I can see that happening. I don't think you were going into a year where, okay, it's 1 and 1A, like, okay, who's going to take this series? It's not that. It's just that, you're giving Emory, it's, he's the guy, but we also know we have this other guy here.
Got it.
Maybe equally as talented, and he offers a different approach to some plays, some design plays that they like to use. So that's why I kind of lean toward the fact I think we'll see them both at different times, but with Emory, getting the bulk of the work.
Okay, now the ground game, both top running backs from last year return as far as production, Pierce and Davis. Davis adds the receiving aspect that Pierce doesn't, but does the team, whether it's Davis, whether it's Pierce, whether it's another running back on the roster, is there a bell cow?
I don't know if there is, Greg. I think that's what I don't see this team having 1,000-yard rusher. I mean, it's not that kind of offense. It's not that kind of backfield. I think this is a lot of people always kind of scoff at the running back by committee approach, but you see that more around the game now, maybe than we have before. Even in the NFL, the running back position, they just spread it out. And, Mullen and the players this camp have talked about, we like to know we're going to go with every drive where we got fresh legs in the backfield. And, I think Dameon Pierce is maybe the workhorse there in some situations, the veteran guy. Malik Davis is more your swing guy out of the backfield, gets an occasional run, hoping for, a little daylight. He's got good speed. And then Lorenzo Lingard, the transfer from Miami last year, didn't get a lot of look, but he's getting a lot of attention this camp because Mullen's talked highly of him a couple of times.
Okay.
I think he's a quick burst guy who can get into the open field and add speed. Then you got the transfer from Clemson, DeMarcus Bowman, who, a couple of years ago was a top-rated running back in the state of Florida, went out to Clemson, didn't get on the field up there, so he came back home to Florida. He's able to play this season. And then you got Naquan Wright, who we saw some last year, who looked good in some spot duties. So it's the old cliche. It's going to be hard to keep everybody happy, right?
Oh.
But I know as a coach, it's probably a lot better problem to have than the opposite end, where you lose your stud and then you're left with nothing.
True.
And I think they have a lot of options back there. And it is, Dan Mullen, we were talking about him as a coach. The creativity of his offense is what I've always liked the most. And that's where I think a coach like him maybe can utilize those guys better than some other coaches.
Okay. Wide receiver, and receiver in general. We talked about the loss of Tony and Pitts and Grimes. So who could possibly step up and be a number one? Do they have that player on the roster right now?
Well, I think they've got a couple guys they hope can be that guy. I don't call him that guy until they go out and do it. But, Jacob Copeland is probably the number one on that list. He's a guy who's been here, has, I think, 44 catches the last couple of years as a secondary receiver. But he's never been the focal point of the passing game or the opposing defense. So it's a different role for him. Justin Shorter, who transferred in from Penn State last year. This is a guy up from where you're from, New Jersey, initially went to Penn State.
Yep.
Didn't work out there, so he comes down to Florida, and they're really looking for him to take a bigger role. Trent Whittemore is another name, a local kid who grew up here in Gainesville, Florida. They really like what he brings to it athletically, a really good hands. And then, it's a lot of young guys. Xavier Henderson, C.J. Henderson's younger brother, the former cornerback here. His younger brother's a receiver. Jaquavian Frazier's. So you're going to hear some names like those that Gator fans don't know much about, but they're going to get an opportunity because they're going to still pass the ball quite a bit. I think you'll see it more balanced this year.
Okay.
But when they throw it, they're going to have to find somebody to throw it to. So all those names are in there. But I think Copeland and Shorter are the two guys most likely to take that leading receiver title.
All right, couple more before I let you go, and that is the schedule. As I mentioned, you got the 2 games first, in-state games, which are nice games to have. Kind of, you don't want to play those FCS opponents, or who wants to see those really bad matchups, even in FBS. But FAU's not bad. They're one of the best teams in their conference. South Florida, things aren't going all well for them, but it's a road game, and it's a nice way to kick off the road schedule. So there are a couple of decent tests to kind of get a lot of these young players up to speed before Alabama. And not many teams have to worry about Alabama on their schedule within the first 3 weeks. So this is going to be a tough open for Florida, but at least they'll be prepared in those first 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, I think those first 2 games are going to be probably watched and scrutinized more than usual because of that third game. And, I like the matchups too. Like you said, I like when the state schools play each other. FAU comes up, Butch Davis. Wait, is he Florida International?
Florida International, correct.
Yeah, and then FAU is Willie Taggart now.
That's right.
So
right.
Former FSU coach. So you got a familiar face there coming back up here. That matchup will have some storylines just because of, Taggart, Mullen, FSU, Florida, now FAU. So, and then you go down to Tampa to play South Florida in Tampa. I think their first regular season game in Tampa in like 30 years. I mean, they played some Outback Bowls, but they haven't played a regular season game there in a long time. So that adds an interesting twist. But ultimately, what's going to be most important is how they look, how they play, how they execute, to give you a gauge of, okay, now the real season starts. Alabama, they're going to be favored in both of those games, obviously, Greg. And anything other than, if they're close or if Florida plays poorly and gets upset, I mean, it's going to set a negative tone going into the Alabama game. But I expect them, the talent-wise, they should handle both of those opponents. And then I'm like everybody else. What are they going to do against Alabama in the swamp? First time in the swamp, I think, since 2011. Alabama's been here, so it's been a decade. Really? Yeah, they've been up to Tuscaloosa, I think, in 2014, and of course they met in the SEC championship game last year. But it's been a while since the Crimson Tide's been to the swamp, so it's going to be like old times on a Saturday night. If everything's normal,
that'd be awesome.
That game rolls around. So I'm looking.
And we don't even know what's going on with Alabama because we don't know what their quarterback situation is like. And
I mean, they have questions too. Yeah. So, but they're opening number one, and until somebody knocks them off, that's where they belong.
That's right. They deserve it. They've earned it.
Yeah. So I'm looking at that's just a great early season gauge because I think Florida, they played Alabama a couple times, Greg, in 15 and 16 in the SEC championship game. And, both times you kind of just knew Alabama was superior. Last year, that game back in December, I mean, that was a shootout, if you remember, 52-46. Really good, entertaining game. And I think that was reflective of really the program. They closed that gap with Bama in the last 3 years under Mullen. And now that, this game this season, it's a great chance for them to say, hey, not only we close the gap, guess what? We can beat you now. So that's what they'll try to do.
And then the rest of the schedule, there's really only one other really big home game. That's the Florida State home game at the end of the year. The neutral game, as usual, with Georgia. And then the 3 road games are mildly tough at LSU, at South Carolina, and at Missouri. But really, the schedule is all about Alabama, and not just winning, but competing and showing that you have what it takes, because it's still, even if you lose the game, doesn't mean you can't win the SEC championship. So that just shows you schedule-wise that as long as the team is competitive, there's still a really good chance for the team to have a good season.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of just barometers hung on that game. A lot of those that you just said, because I think you play well that game, you lose, you're right, you can still win the SEC East and get a rematch.
Yeah.
You play well, you win, and then, you suddenly are going to jump up in the top 5 in the national polls probably. I think you're going to start 13th in the AP and 11th in the coaches poll. So Florida were to beat number 1, third game of the season, they're going to jump up probably in the top 5 or 6 there. And then you're right there in the hunt. You go out and do what you do and, play well throughout the rest of the season, you're going to make the college football playoff most likely. So, I mean, it's all you can ask for, man. I mean, SEC, Alabama, Florida. As someone who's been around the program for a long time and obviously followed the SEC my whole life, I mean, to me, it's still the premier matchup when both programs are humming along. And we all know how Alabama's been humming along like no other program in recent years. Now Florida's got a chance to say, hey, we'd like to join you.
All right, now your show. You have a show called Gator Tells. Is that a weekly show on the FloridaGators.com website?
Yeah, it's a weekly podcast that you can check out, and we heavy on football obviously in the fall, and it's also available I think on iTunes and Stitcher and some other podcast locations. But yeah, it's always on FloridaGators.com on Thursdays, and that's one thing we do just to like different ways to reach people these days, as you well know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and as a fan of my own teams, I think it's great to have a show like that because you guys are around the team more than anybody. So it's important to know what's going on, especially with a college football team with the turnover, or even in basketball. There's such turnover, as we know, that it's real important to trust somebody that knows it's been around like you. And I'm sure you have a pretty good following there, as big as a following as the Florida Gators football team has. And then the basketball team will be kicking things off soon enough, hopefully, too. So we all hope that that's the case, because I want to get my college basketball back as well. Last year was a little bit better, but it still wasn't appetizing.
No, it was tough for everybody, man. I've told 100 people, just talking about what last season was like. It was just I'm glad that everything was able to happen because it was important that,
Yes.
we had something, but it just didn't feel like normal. I remember coming to work on, a game day, for instance, and, outside the swamp, normally, man, it's just packed out there. It was almost like walking in here on a regular Tuesday afternoon because there was just not a lot of buzz and there was a lot of people. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing that again this fall and just, it's just hopefully another little step back closer to normal.
Scott, appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll get an opportunity to talk during the week of Alabama. I know you're going to be real busy, but I'm going to do my best to try to lock in about 10 or 15 minutes with you. So, great job. I appreciate it. And I definitely look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
All right, Greg, we'll do it. Thanks for having me, man.